Agree. Great. Well, moving to the consent agenda, the applicant that was on the consent agenda has requested a deferral. So is there a motion to accept that deferral?
So moved.
I'll second.
Mr. Vanderwerf,
Aye.
Mr. Stoner,
Aye.
Mr. Hancock,
Aye.
Mr. Missile,
Aye.
Mr. Huntington.
Aye.
Great. Thank you, Carolyn. So we have no work session and no regular review items. So moving to other business, we need to adopt the 2021 meeting schedule.
So actually, what I'd like to do today is just get confirmation from you, if possible, that you're okay with maintaining the same schedule next year as we've had this year. That would be meeting the first and third Mondays of the month, beginning at 1 o'clock, unless the Monday's a holiday, and then the meeting moves to the following Tuesday. If that's acceptable with everyone, I'm seeing lots of nods. Great. Then that will be, we'll formally adopt that schedule at the first meeting in January, when we will also be doing elections and adopting the bylaws as well.
Well, thank you, Carolyn. Excuse me. Thank you, Margaret. We'll look forward to the same schedule next year.
So I don't know if everybody else got this email, but the email I got had this 12:30 time every today and every month. And I guess that's the, so I don't, did anybody else get that?
I did, yeah.
Okay.
Which email?
So a Zoom invite went out, and so there was a Zoom invite for 12:30 and a Zoom invite for 1. And I tried to reach out to Carolyn because I didn't know whether maybe we were meeting earlier today, but it also has that same invite time on all the future meetings. So if we can just have that.
I will update that. Yeah, I will update that. Sorry, I try to give myself a buffer, and Zoom only allows me 30-minute increments. I can't do it in 15-minute increments. So that's why it said 12:30, but I will change that to 1 o'clock moving.
Yeah, just thought I'd point it out.
And Carolyn, for logistics, will that still allow you to get the meeting up and running and do the administrative things that you need to be ready to start at 1?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks for catching that, Frank. Okay, well, turning to the EC guidelines and picking up on the discussion we started last week about the proposed review schedule and methodology. Chris, just as background for you, we've talked about dividing up really among the board members. We've all signed up for various corridors to take a look and really just identify additional buildings and landscapes that we think contribute to the character of those areas for a number of years. There's been some thought about starting to develop specific guidelines that recognize the different character of the different corridors. And so I think initially what we've talked about is just this being more of a study phase for the board members to get a better understanding of the elements of these corridors, and then from that discussion to start to formulate guidelines. We haven't yet articulated what the plan would be to translate the study into the guidelines, to Mr. Williamson's point earlier in his comments. And so would welcome thoughts that others may have. I don't have that schedule in front of me, Margaret, but as I recall, we were going to complete, if we follow that one successfully, we would complete the study of all the corridors early next fall.
Pull that up.
I would welcome others' thoughts and discussion about when and how to involve the public. Obviously it's critical. I don't know. I mean, we've talked about this as a study phase, just thinking out loud. I would imagine it may be good to complete some portion of the study before moving to sort of promulgate specific guidelines. And it seems like it would be in that promulgation period that we'd want to find a way to incorporate public participation.
Are you able to see the spreadsheet?
I can see Tuscany right now.
Yeah,
I want to be.
it was up a minute ago.
There it is. Yes. Yeah.
It's hard to break away from Tuscany. Okay.
Yes.
So this is the part of the spreadsheet that lists the assignments and the meeting dates. So
Yeah. So we would
dates
have
through
that
July.
potentially through July. So any initial thoughts from other board members? If we were able to keep that schedule, could we begin after July targeting developing a specific corridor, promulgating a specific corridor guideline?
Dave, I will throw out an idea, and I hope this isn't already existing and I just have missed it. But, thinking about the incredibly important public involvement process and also how to communicate what we're doing to the public in appropriate ways and at the right time, I feel like it would be helpful to have an overarching sort of schedule or an outline of work that, not only captures this preliminary work, but fits this preliminary work into a larger kind of strategic plan on how we're going to get things done and when we're going to get them done. And, what is our overarching mission or goal? And then what are the steps it takes to get there? And then I think when we fully understand that, and again, I hope this doesn't exist and I've just missed it, but when we do fully understand that, we can figure out the dates to actually include the public. Some of those may be required or, just in terms of communication. Some of them, probably more of them, are the ones that we think fit with specific milestones that fit into the overall outline.
Right. I think that's a very good point, Fred. And no, to my knowledge, it doesn't exist. So.
I think we covered some of those points previously, but we did not put them into a concise document that's easy to refer to.
Yeah, just something that'll help us plan, right? Because then we'll also be able to know, Margaret, you'll be able to know if we have a full Monday coming up and you've got 10 agenda items, we're not going to get a whole lot done on the corridor piece. But if we have a day like today, we're not ready for it yet, but if we do in 6 months, we'll know that we can get a lot of work done. And you can have a sort of a plan on how to fit that into the schedule.
Yes, I think that makes good sense, Fred. I guess just in terms of how to sort out which corridors to prioritize and a reasonable time frame for each, it does seem like it would be a lengthy effort to address each of them. So I guess I would invite folks, if you have thoughts, perhaps email me or call me with suggestions, and I'll try and synthesize the thoughts into a potential draft schedule that we could use to expand this. Does that sound acceptable? And Margaret, would that be acceptable for folks to contact me individually with?
Individually, sure. If it's going to be email, it would be, I think, helpful if you just copy me on it as well.
Okay.
And then maybe, Dave, maybe you and I can talk a little bit more about that, that overarching strategic plan and how to how to deal with that.
That sounds great, Margaret.
Hey,
Margaret, you said we have, sorry, go ahead, Frank.
Yeah, could we talk at a conceptual level to your earlier point about how we get from this sort of study phase? We've identified significant contributing elements to a corridor. How we get from there to quarter guidelines, like just at a very high level, what that process looks like.
Frank, was that a question?
Yeah, that was a question.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry.
Well, I mean, it could take probably a couple different formats. I think the difficulty right now in being able to answer that is that it's something that would normally fall to staff to, in large part, to get that done, and there is not staff time available at this point in time. So it's a little bit difficult to answer that question.
Yeah, so I think it's important that if we're going to do this work, that there be that we have a product at the end of it that, you know, makes everybody's life easier.
Right.
And so if it's something that we need to take on as board members, then I think it is really important just to, I mean, it might even be helpful for us just to pick one and just kind of walk through the process a little bit. And I mean, there are some corridors that are going to be pretty easy in my view. But I'm much less clear about how we get from, gee, there are two significant architectural features along this corridor, and what does that mean just in terms of how we approach corridor guidelines for that? You know, I'm
Yeah.
struggling.
Just, I feel like we've had the conversation at some point during this study period that we talked about not necessarily revising the guidelines, but more thinking about it as an addendum or something
Yeah.
that is, you know, a part or kind of maybe some sort of manual that helps us and helps the applicant with corridor specific review. I don't know, am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, Frank, I think that comes out of the idea that I was trying to move forward with of identifying the significant features that we'd be referring to when we look at those guidelines that talk about compatibility with the historic architecture of the area. If we can identify those features for the individual corridors, we might find that the guidelines don't need a complete overhaul, and that an addendum sort of a document might suffice.
So it's more of a reference tool really than guidelines.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yes. So
choosing one corridor that might be relatively easy and doing it as a test case seems like a good idea.
Yeah, that would be really helpful for me because it may also impact the things that I pay attention to in other corridors as you start to, you know, work through the list here.
You mentioned a couple that you thought might be easiest. Which would they be?
If you could scroll up just a little bit so I can see the whole list. There we go. Whoops. You know, I mean, in some ways, 64 feels like could be really easy, or
Right.
just because I think it would be less relevant contextually. I don't think it's generally the focus of our, driver experience is generally not on 64. So in some ways that feels like the lowest hanging fruit, but
would it be acceptable to you, Frank, and to others if we plan to complete the study of all the corridors and then targeted a summer start to trying to focus on translating that to one, or would folks like to do it in parallel?
Well, I'm just wondering whether it would make sense to pick one and to Margaret's point, kind of just work all the way through it and see where it takes us and how much work, what we end up with, like as a way of informing kind of how the rest of the process might be handled kind of most efficiently or effectively. It's kind of understanding how much time and what the document, what that supplement, if that's what it is, to Frank Hancock's point, what that supplement looks like.
Yeah.
It sounds like we're going to have to generate most of that because it sounds like staff doesn't, is not going to have the time. So.
Right. I think my thought had been that with the study format that we've started to lay out, that it might, I think through the study, ideally we'll identify some character defining elements and some characteristics that are kind of unifying or unique to each corridor. And so I was kind of anticipating that there'd be a degree of data gathering just sort of through the study, looking at the things that are contributing. And then after that, maybe just trying to distill from it the characteristics. And then from that, trying to define the supplement a little bit more in terms of what characteristics folks should try to enhance or relate to specific to each corridor. I feel like there might be value in looking, to the extent we could complete the study of all of them. I think there may be some overlap and influence that would be informative.
True.
I'll throw out just a couple thoughts. I think since we have kind of figured out a way to divide and conquer, and I'm not downplaying the need to figure out how we use all of this information, but I would be supportive of at least gathering the data using the second tab on your spreadsheet here and giving that a shot for the ones that we're each responsible for.
Yeah.
And then in parallel, I think, I think maybe Margaret, you and Chris and others can be thinking about, let's say the document is simply a series of photographs with some characteristic design elements, and let's say it's that. How would you then use that? Would that become attached to an applicant's staff report? So if we got if somebody was building a Wild Wings on 250 Pantops, we would get the staff report, and then we would have an attachment, which would be the reference document that we've used that would be applicable to that particular development on that corridor. And maybe there's a section of the staff report that says, based on this reference tool, we're highlighting these specific areas for your consideration. So my point just is that maybe we can do these two things in parallel, where we have discussions about how it will be used, and we also we do the work to assess the corridors.
Right.
Right. Well, I think that's a good suggestion, Fred, and there may be a way to start a parallel step. To the extent each of us is sort of doing a study phase, we could then begin trying to do a proposal phase after that. I could try to indicate that on this schedule in some way that we could also start to understand when and how we would need to invite public comment and participation. Chris, also, we distributed this and carved up the county before your membership. Certainly would welcome if you want to take a look over it.
Yeah, I'm happy to take on any of these if anyone is has more on their hands than they would like to have. I'm certainly open to taking a few of these on. I wonder, and I'm coming into this a little bit late in the discussion, has there been any discussion about establishing criteria for what would constitute a contributing or a structure that would be, I guess, influential? Is there anything specific, just so we would have some kind of a apples to apples comparison between these corridors? If I was looking at one corridor and thought that, any structure built before the year 1940 was notable, and someone else had a completely different frame of reference for that, we might get a different result. Just two different individuals, even on the same corridor, might identify a different set of contributing buildings. So you may have already talked about that, but it might be helpful to just in terms of groundwork, if that hadn't been a consideration, just to kind of lay out a strategy for choosing.
Right. No, I think that's a great question, Chris, and I don't know that we've really articulated particular criteria. I maybe had thought that you're quite right. There will be a fair degree of subjectivity. I would imagine, to me, it makes sense that for each corridor, we should definitely note all the properties that are landmarked or otherwise recognized by the National Trust. But I think that it's an opportunity for us as well to highlight structures from any era that we think successfully reflect the character of that corridor. The character that we would try to define through that observation. I don't know if that helps, or if others would offer additional perspective on how to assess what is contributing.
Yeah, Chris, I think it's a great point. And I don't know, I assume you've seen the spreadsheet and both tabs.
No, I don't think I have.
So maybe the second tab is starting to get to what you're suggesting, but I think,
Okay.
yeah. So we've talked a little, we've talked a fair amount about this. The way I was approaching it, and I got a head start a few months ago when we first started talking about this, because I was taking this one route frequently. I started thinking of it as sort of a top down, right? A little more general. What is the general feel of the corridor? And then the next step is, what transitions are there? Does it go from commercial to residential to, what's the general feel and makeup of the corridor by use and also by landscape character? And then the third tier was more about the specific examples. And some of those might be open space, right?
Yeah.
But there also are specific structures that might have some architectural character that are noteworthy. So that's the way I approached it. And what it did for me was it helped me avoid my favorites. Yeah. So I wasn't just going, oh, I really like that one building, on this. And so I'm going to focus on that and call out all its good characteristics. It helped me kind of think broader and to try to avoid favoritism.
Right. Okay. Yeah, this second tab is exactly what I was talking about.
Great. Yeah. Thank you, Fred, for highlighting it. And I guess the columns L through W or so are taking some of the guidelines that are in our overall guidelines. And the thought is that you could check those that the property seems to fulfill or not. We talked a little bit when we last met about the possibility of grading these on a scale, whether the example really fulfills that objective or partially does. But that's, certainly a much finer grain than we necessarily need to get to on anything we nominate. But and then the notable characteristics is just available to start describing, why we think it deserves consideration, and from that can probably begin to distill some other characteristics. I like, Fred, your suggestion of also thinking hierarchically from the really big picture of the corridor to its zones and transitions, and then looking at how these elements contribute.
One thing to think about too is kind of, oh, go ahead, Frank.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to bring us back to that one comment where we were talking about kind of what this is and what it isn't. So I'll hold off if you've got comments on this.
Yeah, my only comment was, I'm assuming the sort of 500-foot boundary is what we would utilize in identifying significant contributing structures, things beyond that 500-foot. We could know, how do we judge the significance from a distance perspective?
I think something that you think is perceivable from the corridor and shapes the perception of its character when one is in it, maybe is what I would suggest. So the things, if they're 500 feet away and they really influence what the character of that corridor is, then certainly it makes sense. But if they don't, then
Yeah, I would add that the current guidelines just reference traditional architecture of the area. They don't, it doesn't say within 500 feet of the street. And that 500 feet, just as a reminder, parcels that are within the entrance corridor overlay or the parcels that are that were adjacent to the street at the time the street was designated an entrance corridor for the full depth of that parcel. The 500 feet comes into play when the parcel was not adjacent to the street.
One thing that comes to mind is the Centera Hospital. I remember years ago we were talking about that, and you don't really see it from 64 if you're right next to it. You see it when you're going eastbound back by 5th Street, right? So it's far in the distance, but it's a view shed issue. And it did determine, I think, the level of detail we used when we reviewed it. But it also is way more than 500 feet. So I think to Dave's point, I agree. It's whatever is visually influencing the corridor, right? That makes sense, Frank?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know how you determine when something is, I mean, I'll take Westminster Canterbury as an example, which is highly visible from 64, but it's nowhere near the corridor. But I would say it shapes my perception as I move through the corridor. Should it be considered, or is it irrelevant?
I would note it. I think, I would say cast your net broadly on the corridor, and whatever you see, put it down. There may be another level of refinement where we may all look at this and go, that's just not worth really considering. And it may be taken off the list, but I think at this point, I would say cast your net broadly, and if you see it, throw it on there.
Okay.
You maybe wouldn't comment on roof material, or secondary materials, or get into that kind of detail, but you might note it for other reasons.
Gotcha. Okay, that's helpful.
One thing I was thinking about too, I really thought someone made the comment, which is really helpful. I think it was Frank Hancock, about what this is and what it isn't. And I think that's this whole effort. And I think that's important to make clear to the public, to Neil, people like that, right? That this is not a comprehensive rewrite of the design guidelines, if I'm hearing it correctly. This is a reference tool. And the reason that we're doing it is to acknowledge unique differences and characteristics of each of the corridors. So, it puts it into brackets. It says, here's what it is. So yeah, public involvement's important, but really what we're doing is we are creating an assessment, or there's not a lot of subjectivity in this. Hopefully it's more objective.
that's very well said, Fred. Thank you. Any other discussion about this item this afternoon?
I think Frank Stoner got more than his fair share of corridors, so maybe he would want to share with you, Chris.
Sure, yeah.
You got a lot of them.
I'm happy to. I think I've got 6 or 7 of them in here. Yeah, Chris, just look at that list, and if you see anything I've got that you have a special interest in, please.
Chris, when I shared this originally with the ARB members, I think you weren't on board yet, so I will add to
Yeah.
that list of
Right.
access it.
Great. Well, thank you, everybody. Helpful discussion, I think, to clarify what our plans will be. So moving on to the next meeting. Our next meeting is a virtual meeting scheduled for January 4th.
Oh, Dave, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I realized that left something out of your cheat sheet. Sorry. On the agenda is the approval of minutes for the
Thank you. Remind me of the date.
December 7th.
Great. So do we have a motion to approve the minutes of December 7th?
So move.
I'll move.
Second?
I'll second.
Thank you.
Mr. Vanderwerf,
Aye.
Mr. Stoner,
Aye.
Mr. Hancock,
Aye.
Mr. Bissell,
Aye.
and Mr. Henningsen.
Henningsen. I guess I should abstain since I did not attend the last meeting.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. Yep. Thank you, Karen. Okay, our next meeting is scheduled virtually on January 4th. Will everybody be present? Anybody who'll be absent? Great. All right. A full house. Okay, and as Margaret noted, we will elect officers and set the meeting schedule and adopt the bylaws. So I'm glad everybody will be able to be there. There being no further business, we will adjourn now until our next meeting Monday, January 4th. Thank you, everyone. Happy holidays.
Thanks. Have a
Thank
great
you.
Holidays.
Thanks, everybody.
Everybody,
Happy holidays.
Thank you. You too.
take care.
Take care. See ya.